Elden Ring is the most awarded video game of all time, arguably the greatest ever made. But one of the most common criticisms of Fromsoft's magnum opus is the minor bosses littered throughout the lands between, with many being lazily reused, and plenty just being poorly designed. While I don't blame Fromsoft for reusing bosses, every open world game has plenty of corner cutting to shorten development time. Today we'll explore the mini bosses of Elden Ring and figure out if the critiques are truly warranted. In my last video I covered the more major bosses of the game, so if any boss is missing from this list, I'll have spoken about it already. All that said, let's kick things off with the single worst boss Fromsoft have ever created. Where do I even start with this utterly miserable excuse for a boss fight? It ticks every box for detestable Soulsborne bosses. Janky and difficult to read moveset, status effect that instantly kills the player and takes a skill out of the encounter, and a bunch of regular enemies mindlessly thrown into the arena to gank the player. What's worse, it's a reused boss that doesn't even have a role in the story, and not just a reuse of a random field boss, but the introductory remembrance boss. But the one in Rao Ruins does everything wrong, and has absolutely nothing to redeem the fight. I never thought Soulsborne's biggest and best DLC would have the worst boss in the series, but there isn't a fight that frustrates me at how unforgivably awful it is as much as this. Not even the Royal Rat Authority. Elden Ring has many unremarkable duo fights, but for the most part they're just disappointing. The Abductor Virgins are genuinely unpleasant to fight. They don't complement each other in any shape or form, and even using a spirit summon, their aggro feels ridiculously difficult to manage. I don't like this boss at all, and I have absolutely no problem calling it my least favourite boss in Elden Ring's base game. In the major boss ranking, the full-grown variant of this boss claimed the bottom spot, and this one's slightly weaker. Falling Star Beast is just annoying to fight. His moveset is frustrating and makes it difficult to actually interact with the boss. It's an uninspired encounter that brings nothing to the table. What a stupid boss. It's two regular enemies which no one liked in the first place, dumped in a room with a boss bar slapped on top. There's no reason to like this boss, it doesn't even deserve to be a boss, and we'd all be better off if they didn't exist. This boss is a slightly harder but also less enjoyable take on Miranda, dumping an Omen Killer into the arena with her, but by no means is it difficult. The Omen Killer is actually a decently well designed enemy, but it's just far too easy to beat the Omen Killer and wail on Miranda once he's dead. It's an unmemorable and unfulfilling boss encounter, which is an issue I feel is present in many of Elden Ring's dungeon bosses. This has got to be our winner for the title of single easiest boss in the series. Seriously, it puts Pinwheel to absolute shame. I just stood in front of her and swung my sword like there was no tomorrow. I didn't move the entire fight and I didn't get hit once. I just feel bad for this pathetic flower, but I can't justify putting such a terribly designed boss outside of the bottom tier. It is a good sight when you see her in Night Rain though. Free item drop, free runes, brilliant. A perfect example of how to tarnish a fantastic introductory boss. For many players who miss Soldier of Godric, the Tree Sentinel will be the first boss they encounter, and it serves that purpose excellently. I think I had it in my top 10 major bosses in Elden Ring. The Tree Sentinel duo, however, has none of that appeal. By the time you reach them, a single Tree Sentinel will pose little threat, but even so, two of them will still be a huge challenge. The fight essentially becomes a case of lowering one Sentinel away from his buddy, at which point it's just a rematch against the Tree Sentinel, but with none of its merits. I honestly have no idea what Miyazaki was thinking putting this boss in the game. The Crystalline Trio isn't a hugely notable fight, which is why it sits just outside of the bottom tier. It's by no means an impressive encounter, even with a summon fighting 3 enemies isn't particularly enjoyable, and there are no measures put in place to manage this, aside from each having different weapons, but they're never going to struggle to make you miserable. The Deathbird finds itself this low due to its incredibly uninspired moveset. It is thoroughly unenjoyable to fight, and the presentation is forgettable. The boss does nothing to make itself stand out, apart from being incredibly janky. Similar to its lesser variant, the Deathrite Bird is a mechanically uninteresting fight, at least this one has slightly cooler visuals. Necromancer Garrus is one of the least notable fights in the series. His moveset isn't the worst, but yet again he summons regular enemies to annoy the player. Even worse, it's Elden Ring's incarnation of the Bone Wheel Skeletons. Overall, he's just a completely forgettable boss and has no standout qualities. This is certainly the worst version of the Estelle fight for me. The Remembrance Estelle has the benefit of being the final boss in one of the game's biggest NPC questlines, and is found in a much cooler location. The slight differences in their moveset also contribute to the difference in my opinions on the variants. I don't enjoy the Stars of Darkness's cloning, whereas I think Natural Born's Waves of Darkness are well designed attacks. Natural Born of the Void is undoubtedly the better version of this fight. Due to the speed of this boss's attacks, I find them pretty tough to engage with. That's not to say it's fun, the moves are just hard to react to, so it provides none of the gratification of overcoming a huge challenge. Admittedly, this boss is still really easy, since spirits, jumping attacks, or staggering can trivialize it. Its design is cool, but the Cemetery Shade itself is a pretty unremarkable encounter, and really poorly designed enemy. Esgar is kind of like Elden Ring's version of the Capra Demon. He throws a pair of Soulsborne dogs at you, though in this case at least the arena is much more tolerable. Unfortunately, I don't love fighting against the Roduvia, the weapon of choice for this boss. All this adds up to make a rather unremarkable boss fight. This is a completely forgettable boss to me. It brings nothing new or unique to the table and only serves to fill out the boss roster. It doesn't do anything unforgivably badly, but it's a completely unnoteworthy encounter. This boss has one of the jankiest movesets in the series. It's a complete mess from start to finish. You can barely even tell what the boss is doing half the time. The tree spirit drops the ball on all the best parts of Soul's boss fights, leading to it being a pretty bad encounter overall. That's only made even worse by the awful status effect. Similar to its putrid counterpart, the ulcerated tree spirit has an incredibly messy moveset which is completely unenjoyable to engage with. It suffers from exactly the same problems as the putrid variant, other than the lack of the terrible status effect. I'm sure people are likely to be surprised seeing Xenosax this high. She's the worst dragon boss in the game, nobody will dispute that. There's little to differentiate her from Lanceax, and every change they did make is a negative one. It's an ankle-chipping snooze fest made even worse by the ridiculous damage output of the lightning that spreads like wildfire through the lake she's fought in. There really is no positives here or justification for her existence, but there's nothing quite infuriating enough to put her lower on the list. I don't typically like to call any boss slop, but the Red Bear is inarguable, unbalanced slop. It's a pretty standard rule of good boss design, enemy design in general, that they should have downtime between their attacks, at least enough for the player to get in strikes of their own. Elden Ring is already demanding in this area, with bosses weaving attacks together more quickly than in previous games, but while you're in range of his strikes, the Red Bear never stops attacking. He also gets some utterly obnoxious iframes, notably when he goes for a jumping attack. It basically forces you to trade attacks with him, or he's just gonna dodge all your attacks. But he deals so much damage, stacks bleed on top of that, and just unleashes so many attacks on you in such a short period of time, it just isn't fair. He's not even hard, he's a walk in the park as so many NPC style bosses are, but there's not a single redeeming quality to his design. The Lamenter really does have some great concepts, such as the Horde of Clones, its unique one-shot debuff that builds up if you don't kill his duplicates, and while not a part of the fight itself, its mask turning the player into the boss is really cool and something I'll definitely be playing around with in the future. Unfortunately, the mechanics of the fight just don't quite hold up. His moveset is pretty boring and the clones get tedious to wipe out. It has some good elements to it, but the fight itself just falls a little flat. Ons was actually the first boss I fought in Shadow of the Erdtree. No, the Furnace Golems don't count, they don't have a boss health bar. I wasn't hugely impressed. Elden Ring's bosses are notoriously unrelenting and have little to no downtime between attacks, but Ons takes that to such an extreme degree that it's a little obnoxious. He just attacks so quickly that it's incredibly difficult to learn and react to his moves. He can be staggered easily, which really is the route to victory here, but that's not a particularly interesting way to beat a boss. I don't hate Ons, but it definitely wasn't a great look for the first encounter of Shadow of the Erdtree. I truly don't understand the purpose of this boss's existence. It does the exact same thing as the original and nothing more. There's no reason to even fight this boss over the normal Mimic tier. Yet another Elden Ring mini-boss attempting to fill out the boss roster. Dryleaf Dame faces problems present in virtually all NPC style bosses, and throws in the excessive aggression of Swordmaster Ons. It's not to nearly as egregious a degree, but he can still be very frustrating when he puts the pressure on you. He's a serviceable showcase of the Dryleaf arts, just not a particularly engaging combat encounter. The Black Blades are an interestingly designed boss, with a cool moveset, though some moves are very challenging to dodge. Unfortunately, their size really impacts how enjoyable the fights are, so for me it just doesn't deserve to be any higher on the list. The best bosses in the series, in my opinion, are those which feel like a true exchange between powerful combatants, which is why I love the dual style fights. To the Black Knife's detriment is that it doesn't feel like an exchange. It's more of wait for the boss to attack, dodge, get a few hits in, then wait, and wait, and wait, while the boss just sits there invisible. It's just not all that fun. Alecto suffers somewhat from the issues of her lesser counterparts. It's a much more engaging fight, but it does feel slightly overtuned in terms of just how quickly the boss can chain attacks together. It's an unenjoyable fight for similar reasons to the normal Black Knives, but the difficulty does do it a favour by making it a bit more involved. Yet another shoddily made duo fight from Elden Ring. The demi-human duo feel more like a regular enemy encounter than a boss. I would have enjoyed the stealth aspect of the fight had it been a level encounter, but it's a gank with regular enemies thrown in to gank you even harder. At least it's not remotely difficult. The demi-human queens all occupy the same spot in my ranking, since there's really nothing of note to distinguish them from one another. As far as the fights themselves go, I don't care for them much. The demi-humans have pretty bland and uninspired movesets, and the presentation of the fights is nothing you can't find in any other Elden Ring mini-boss. The Godskin Spirit Cooler is significantly better than this variant. The Crucible Knights are already used vastly more than they should be, which only serves as a detriment to this fight. It's less interesting than the fight with the Crucible Knight duo, and is super forgettable on the whole. This is another boss which serves as a successor of sorts to the Capra Demon. Unlike Esgar, the Omen Killer itself has a moveset which I find quite engaging, though not enough so to make me forget about the fight's usage of Soulsborne dogs. This bot belongs to both the Dragonkin in the Lake of Rot and Syofra River. While I enjoy the Dragonkin Soldier of Noxtella a great deal, it placed really highly on my major boss ranking. The regular Dragonkin Soldiers are just not very enjoyable, their movesets are pretty boring, and the presentation is mediocre at best, especially when they're vastly overshadowed by a far better version of virtually the same boss. This is unquestionably the worst experience I've had in a Souls game. Granted, it wasn't the game or even the boss's fault. The short man right hooked me and gave me an abscess, so I was not having a pleasant week. However, disregarding this, the Royal Revenant still isn't an impressive boss. It's essentially a regular enemy, and not a hugely well designed one either. At least with some of Elden Ring's dungeon bosses, they use well designed enemies such as the Clean Rot Knights. This is one of the laziest bosses in the series. I'm sure there's a lore reason why Godfroy exists, but the fight really just is a recycling of a pretty good boss. Mechanically it is solid since it has Godrick's moveset, but it really just needed to distinguish itself more. On the day of the DLC's release, I kept hearing horror stories about this guy. He's so hard, he's unfair, he deals too much damage. What? No, you're getting mauled by a boss with no Shadow Tree fragments? To be fair, there's a good chance this boss will be the first player's encounter, so maybe he could be a little easier. Even aside from the difficulty, he's a standard NPC style boss, with the infamous high page crossbow that everyone hates, and a greatsword which always hits you when it feels like it shouldn't. No idea why they changed the name though. Definitely my least favourite dragon fight in Elden Ring's base game. Borealis suffers from a severe case of frigid outskirts syndrome. That is, I struggled to actually get my bearings during the fight. The dragons already provide enough of a challenge to the camera, and the oppressive fog does nothing to help that. X-Ix is one of the most forgettable dragon fights. It doesn't help that it's not particularly fun either, mechanically being the least engaging of the Elden Ring dragons, and he also bears the worst status element of any of them. Adula would be a fair bit higher on the list since the locations you encounter her are fitting and visually it's a great fight that feels straight out of Dragon Age. Unfortunately, just when you really start getting into the fight, she flies off, a decision which I personally feel takes away from the engagement. Some people may appreciate this design decision, however it just doesn't sit well with me. Smarag is slightly higher than Adula, since the fight is all one part. Other than that, the presentation is definitely weaker, though mechanically they're very similar. Concluding our long streak of Elden Ring main game dragon bosses is Caelid's Flying Dragon Grail. The setting for this fight adds to the encounter for me, since it's confined to one bridge, which somewhat remedies the issues I have with the dragons lower on the list. His move pool is largely the same as Agheel, so I think he belongs at the top of the string of Agheel clones. We may have finished the string of base game Agheel reskins, but there's more to come in the DLC. The Ghost Flame Dragon does have a really interesting visual design, and I especially appreciate the encounter which sees regular enemies fighting the dragon alongside you. It doesn't change much mechanically from the base game bosses, but it at least does enough to justify being higher than any of the other wyverns. The Jagged Peak Drake ranks as the highest Agheel reskin, though once again it hardly differentiates itself. Visually it's perhaps my favourite alongside the Ghost Flame Dragons, but the lightning is a nice change to the fight, and the Drake does at least offer something somewhat fresh in terms of gameplay. It's hardly a significant change, but it's the best of these dragon clones nonetheless. I honestly don't even remember fighting this boss on my first playthrough. When I was clearing up the last few bosses in the series, I was sure I'd never beaten them, but reaching the location of the boss fight, I found nothing. I assumed since I didn't even remember the fight, it was incredibly forgettable, and that's why I put it in the upper echelon of the bad tier. In my most recent playthrough, I fought them once again, and yeah, that placement didn't change. The Putrid Avatar is a case of an already mediocre boss getting an annoying status condition dumped on top, and it dragging the fight down as a result. The other three avatars have a decent enough moveset, and thankfully aren't terrible bosses, but the Putrid Avatar is a reuse of an already abundant boss which has status ailments to make it worse. Vike is a hugely significant part of Elden Ring's lore, and his design and moveset are awesome. Unfortunately for Vike, I do find him somewhat frustrating to fight due to just how fast his tracking is, and frenzy attacks are never fun to deal with. His lightning strike also has ridiculous lock onto the player, and since he's an Evergel boss, his arena isn't all that special. None of that makes him a bad boss, but he's held back from being as good a boss as he could have been. The Champion's Wolf is such a downgrade from the Red Wolf found in Raya Lucaria during the main progression. That boss was an original encounter with a great moveset that provides a decent challenge at that point in the game. The Red Wolf of the Champion is just a reskin of the existing boss, which utterly fails to provide any challenge since it's just slightly scaled up, yet still has no significant health to speak of. Solaria is yet another reskin of an already overused enemy which is better in nearly every other encounter. It doesn't help that she's dumped at the back of a secret area following a convoluted questline, meaning the majority of players will never even encounter her. O'Neill is an unremarkable fight. To his credit, the fight uses ads better than the majority of Fromsoft bosses, but it's still not hugely engaging. The boss himself has a decent moveset, though it's vastly improved upon by his later variant in Command and Isle. The Magma Worms scattered around the lands between are fine enough enemies. Their movesets are relatively varied, though compared to the quality we expect from bosses in the Souls series, there's really nothing to justify this boss existing, given there's already a Magma Worm, which, depending on your path to Altus Plateau, could be a main game boss, and will likely be the first one you encounter. Great Worm Theodorix is a similar case to his average counterparts. Nothing really changes about his moveset, though he does become more difficult and his name distinguishes him from the others, so he's a spot higher on the list. Rakshasa is another of the underwhelming jail bosses from Shadow of the Erdtree. She deals way too much damage and attacks relentlessly. The blood loss build up is honestly a no factor because once she's hit you enough times to build it up, you're dead anyway. She's not terrible and her moveset is reasonably well designed, certainly not unfair, but she just doesn't have much to offer. The Beastmen aren't a terrible gank, and I appreciate the use of stealth in this fight making it many times easier. Unfortunately, it's still far too easy to get overwhelmed by the combination of ranged and melee attacks, provided you don't use a summon. But if you do elect to summon, the fight becomes a pushover, as is the case with many of Elden Ring's minor bosses. Chief Bloodfiend is a complete nothing burger of boss. He's a big beast style fight with a simple moveset and isn't difficult at all. His design is good and there's nothing I hate about the Chief, he just doesn't do anything special. The meta exists for exactly this kind of boss. The Stone Digger Troll is a slightly altered variant of one of Elden Ring's regular enemies. Luckily for this boss, most players will not have beaten one of the regular trolls at this point of the game, so the Stone Digger will likely be your first victory against one. It's a pretty solid early game enemy design, though as a boss it just provides an enjoyable but not all that memorable battle. The Bell-Bearing Hunters actually have a very well designed moveset. Unfortunately, they are overshadowed by the boss of the Shaded Castle, who shares their moveset and provides a much more interesting fight with it. While it's definitely become more infamous thanks to Night Rain, this boss shares the lack of memorability held by many of the bosses in this tier. The Wormface is such a uniquely and hauntingly designed enemy, and the giant boss variant is honestly chilling to witness. I love the eerie forest the fight takes place in, and the horror-esque vibes of the encounter are really what makes it fun. It lands itself in the lower half of the list simply due to its moveset, which is mechanically very simple. The Cursed Blades are a cool enemy type, but I just feel like they're far too aggressive to be great. In a similar vein to the Red Bear, Labirith chains attacks so quickly that you're essentially forced to trade with the boss, but she has absolutely no health whatsoever, and doesn't deal enough damage to threaten you. She really is the opposite of the Red Bear. I don't dislike the fight, but it never feels like I'm learning her moves or mastering the boss, so it falls in the mediocre tier. The Erdtree avatars are probably the most commonly found boss in the series. There's at least one in every region of the game, and for the most part they don't change up their moveset much. To their credit, they bear a pretty good moveset akin to the classic Asylum Demon from Dark Souls. While I think their heavy usage works in the context of the game, it does detract from the boss's quality somewhat. Following one giant boss with another, Bowls is a variation on Elden Ring's classic troll enemies. Unlike the Stone Digger troll, Bowls is actually an enemy design which can be found elsewhere in the game, which dampens some of the novelty of the encounter. The fight is thankfully pretty cool and mechanically solid, it's just a shame it fails to really leave a mark. Lanceax is a visually amazing encounter. The red lightning is such a nice touch, and her attacks are all fun to interact with. The reason this fight isn't higher is due to the issues faced with many of Elden Ring's dragons, with the best way to approach the fight being hacking at the legs. I'm also not a fan of the fight being interrupted at half health, but I do enjoy it on the whole. Agil is the blueprint for the dragon fights scattered throughout Elden Ring. Since it's typically the first you'll face, it has a lot more uniqueness than the others. The surprise of the dragon swooping down on you is a great moment, and mechanically this fight doesn't feel repetitive like the others since it's the first time you've battled a massive flying beast. Agil is a landmark for the spectacle provided by the bosses in Elden Ring.
You unkindled are all the same. You watch my videos every week, yet never once do you take your blades to that subscribe button. You are content to let me rot atop this mountain of unclicked buttons, to let me suffer for eternities to come until every boss has been ranked from worst to best. I did not wish for it to end this way. Why couldn't you have simply subscribed?
The Crucible Knights are better than most duo bosses. They're one of my favourite enemy designs in this series, so their movesets are nothing to complain about. I do think they're a bit too aggressive to work as a duo, but thankfully this can be counteracted using summons. It's definitely made more fun with a Spirit Ash than without, but even using an ally, it's just an average encounter. The Misbegotten Crusader is held back due to sharing a moveset with the Misbegotten Warrior, a much more memorable and entertaining fight. It is a pretty good moveset to replicate, but the boss really plays second fiddle to its original variant. This is an enjoyable enough fight, but I can't help but feel that the Rune Bears work far better as an incredibly powerful regular enemy, akin to the trolls of Western Limgrave. The mechanics of the encounter are okay, nothing amazing, and it does still feel like a powerful foe, but that part of the fight is made less potent when low level players will likely already have experienced the threat posed by the Rune Bears. The Red Bears are fine, they're just alright. There's slightly more variety to their movesets than the Rune Bear, but it really does just build off that base. The inclusion of some bestial incantations was a cool touch, but I'm never going to be singing Ralvar or Rugalea's praises from the rooftops. These jail bosses are getting repetitive now. There's a consistent trend. They're basic NPC style fights with serviceable movesets, never doing anything special. The Dancer is fun to fight, but she's incredibly fast and unrelenting, which can just feel a little too oppressive. If she lands a hit, you're going to be wading through flames trying to get your health back, but when you are in the fight, she doesn't really have a way to stop you stun locking her. A fight that I somewhat enjoy, just so forgettable. The Guardian Golem is a similar situation to the Rune Bear in that it works better as a level hazard than an actual boss, but it gains a slightly higher placement since I think they're a more uniquely designed enemy, and it's a cool change to fight one with a full health bar in comparison to the incomplete giants around the game's earlier levels. I love this boss's design, that's essentially what gets him this high. The fight is okay, but I do feel his attack strings are a bit too long given he can build up blood loss pretty quickly. It's a serviceable fight brought up by an amazing design, and a damn cool weapon to match. The Nox duo are a surprisingly well handled duo fight by Elden Ring standards, due to each enemy being well balanced with the other. Individually their move pools aren't amazing, but they gel together well enough to create a solid gank fight. The Watchdog duo are a fair stretch less fun than the individual counterparts, but I still find them an enjoyable encounter. It's definitely a boss made better with the use of a summon, but even without, it's an engaging 2-on-1 battle. It's just sadly overshadowed by the battles against individual Watchdogs elsewhere in the game. This gank is an example of taking two well-designed enemies and putting them together to create a good duo boss. The fight works since the aggression and movesets of each Crystallian are tempered to balance their aggression, and together or alone their attacks are entertaining to avoid. Matched with the great design of the Crystallians, this provides a fun gank rare for Elden Ring. The Scaly Misbegotten bears an expectedly similar move pool to the other Misbegotten bosses. It does vary it up somewhat in its design and attack patterns, which puts it a fair few spots higher than the much less distinct Misbegotten Crusader. Slapping a status effect on a repeat boss is a surefire way to make them entirely forgettable, but the Putrid Grave Warden Duelist is incredibly similar to the original, which is a solid boss overall. There's nothing really of note about the Putrid Duelist, it's fun enough, but it just does nothing to differentiate itself. This fight does Godskin Duo better than Godskin Duo. In this fight, you can actually end it only killing each Godskin once. Seems like that might be a good idea, FromSoft. Maybe? Give it a try? Jokes aside, it's a pretty fun fight. Very easy, but fun nonetheless. Definitely the best Godskin boss in Elden Ring. The Apostle has the most intriguing and well-designed moveset of any of them, with an abhorrent and almost alien design complemented by its unnatural moveset. It's clearly evident that this boss should have been left alone rather than dumped in an unfair mandatory gank with its fat counterpart. That said, I still don't love its moveset quite as much as many bosses higher on the list. Aiden is a fatty. He's a big old fatso. He has a big belly. Yeah, he's literally just here because he's funny and round. No other reason. He's too easy to be even remotely notable. This boss is essentially this high just because of the name. It's a Kieran Hughes boss. He does have a pretty cool moveset, but you just don't get to see a lot of it because it's too easy. I really have nothing to say about this boss. It's the short man boss. The Knights Cavalry are a decent set of bosses with engaging movesets. This boss is one of the few in Elden Ring that benefit from horseback combat. It's still fun without, but using Torrent adds an extra layer of intensity. I think Elden Ring's time of day specific encounters are pretty cool ideas, and Knights Cavalry is likely my favourite. The Black Knights are some of my favourite enemies in the DLC and in all of Elden Ring. Not sure they really needed two boss variant, especially given we encounter regular knights in the world before either of the mini-bosses, but I do like Garou nonetheless. I love the moveset of the Hammer Knights. Mostly. The shield bash can be frustrating. Unfortunately, the unique element Garou does bring to the table is the tongue. That oh so janky tongue. It has some really strange hitboxes, strange timings. I'm just not a huge fan. But I do like the overall enemy design. And of course I'm going to enjoy a boss variant a good degree. The Fell Twins are an incredibly unique boss, almost feeling like the Four Kings with their black abyss of an arena. The Fell are already one of the toughest and most interesting enemies on Elden Ring, so putting two of them together in a well-balanced duo boss with an eerie setting makes it even better. The Twins provide a fun combat encounter that, while not hugely difficult, is still a fight I look forward to breezing through each playthrough. For an Elden Ring mini-boss, the Beastman has a very diverse move pool. On my first time fighting this boss, I was taken completely by surprise at the length of its combos, and it's pretty difficult to contend with at that point of the game. It's an example of a well-designed mini-boss in Elden Ring, and a solid early game challenge. The Grave Warden Duelist is in a similar vein to the Beastman, being an early game threat with an engaging moveset. The difficulty of the fight naturally varies depending on your use of summons, but either way it provides a solid encounter that doesn't have quite enough flair to earn it a higher placement. The Pumpkinhead has all the same merits as the previous two entries, and as with those bosses, it was featured in Elden Ring's beta. Seeing footage of this boss prior to release, I thought it looked dull and slow, elements common in many big beast enemies, which I tend to dislike. However, when I encountered this boss in Elden Ring's release, I quickly realised it was a fun boss which was deserving of the praise I'd heard it receive. It lands a spot above the Grave Warden Duelist, simply because I find its design more interesting, though that's not to discredit its moveset. The Onyx Lord has a design I find intriguing. I love its use of cosmic magic, as this is one of the more interesting aspects of Elden Ring's lore to me. This boss has a pretty good range of attacks which are all decently fun to go up against. Where it falls off is the same areas as the past few bosses, in that it just isn't significant enough to be any higher. The Alabaster Lord is essentially the same boss as the Onyx Lord, though I find it a fair bit more memorable since it's found in an Evergel, which is a concept I really like, despite not always being well executed. The Death Knight is a boss you can definitely see FromSoft put more effort into than most of Elden Ring's minor bosses. It has a very varied moveset with a lot of different elements to challenge the player, and it's fun for virtually every playstyle. His moves are fun to dodge, fun to guard counter, fun to engage with sorcery. He's just a really solid minor boss, exactly what I'm looking for in an encounter of this variety. The Tibia Mariner was actually one of the earliest bosses I fought, finding the one in the Mistwoods mere hours into my first playthrough. It has a pretty great design which definitely sticks with you, though its attacks are basic and it primarily relies on the additional enemies it summons, which will always bring a boss down the rankings for me. I've spoken about the Watchdog earlier in the video, and this variant is an improvement in the sense that it's a single boss rather than a duo, which in classic FromSoft fashion is worse than their 1v1 battles. The solo Watchdog still bears the solid mechanics of its two enemy variant, but they're much more fun to interact with when you're not having sorcery constantly shoved down your throat. Adread is definitely the superior boss of the Black Knight twins. I think I slightly prefer the Twin Blade variant of this enemy. It's certainly cooler. The new mechanics Adread adds are also notably better than Garou's. While it isn't a perfect boss, I do definitely enjoy the encounter with the Twin Blade wielding Black Knight. Elden Ring's Crystallians are a really cool enemy, especially those that use ring blades, as is the case with this boss. It has a very unique mechanic where the damage is reduced until you whittle its health bar down a certain amount, and once it reaches that point you can damage it normally. While the Crystallian isn't a difficult boss, its moveset is enjoyable to engage with, and I don't really think this boss has any major negatives. These pair of opponents consist of my favourite enemies in all of Elden Ring, which means their fight has an easy time providing a pretty enjoyable encounter. They're placed at the end of a terrible cave area, which causes you to most likely head into the boss with an annoying status effect, but it adds another edge to the already imposing encounter against two of the game's more difficult enemies. The Clean Rock Knight is slightly more enjoyable than its duo variant for me. Single enemy bosses are typically more fun in these games than ganks, and I prefer being able to focus on just this one incredible enemy. As a boss, it's a little underwhelming, as it definitely feels like a regular enemy, but its placement in the game makes it a fair challenge nonetheless, and this knight's moveset is honestly much better designed than many of the Remembrance bosses, as should be evident by its placement on the list. The Crucible Knight found within Stormhill's Evergel is an incredibly difficult fight for its position in the game, and one I was unable to overcome initially. It certainly feels like one FromSoft intended to be fought later in the game, but it can be defeated early on if you know what you're up against. This boss is brought down a little by the multitude of the same enemies found throughout the game, but the Crucible Knights are thankfully one of Elden Ring's best enemy designs. Mechanically, it's a well-designed fight, but is held back by its lack of individuality. The runner-up for the position of my favourite Evergel boss in Elden Ring, the Ancient Hero of Zamor, is a very well considered boss. Essentially, its only flaws come from its lack of difficulty and uniqueness, though these are flaws held by all the Evergel bosses. This fight consists of some pretty great mechanics, and I don't think it has a bad attack, a rarity in FromSoft bosses. If it was a full-fledged boss, I have no doubt it could be higher, but as it stands, it's here near the top of the decent tier. I absolutely loved this boss when I first fought it. Darraville was the first Evergel boss I encountered, and gave me the weapon I used throughout most of my first playthrough. He has an engaging and fast-paced moveset, which introduces you to the higher speed of Elden Ring very well. He's not the most challenging boss, but I find him enjoyable enough to fight that he deserves to be near the top of the decent tier. After many encounters with the treacherous patches, Elden Ring finally gave us the chance to get some true payback in the form of a boss battle. How does the boss hold up? Well, it's certainly nothing special, but getting the opportunity to beat patches to a pulp after all these games makes this more than a worthy encounter. There's nothing else to this fight really, it's just the realization of any Souls fan's dream to slay this treacherous turd. We've finally done it, every boss in Elden Ring, yes, all of them, ranked from worst to best, and we're nearing the end of my series ranking every Soulsborne boss. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you haven't already, go check out the major boss ranking, or any of my other FromSoft videos. As always, I encourage respectful discussion in the comments, and we'll be praying for your like and subscription, like that one spectre at the top of Castle Sol. I'm not certain what next week's video will be just yet. I was supposed to loop back around to ranking Bloodborne's Chalice bosses, but with the release of Silksong right around the corner, I might stray off the path to give you my thoughts on those bosses. Either way, I hope I'll see you in that video.